She stood in the cold Seoul rain, penniless, homeless, with no future, while the man she once loved raised a glass of champagne with someone else behind gleaming glass doors. A single night had wiped away everything she'd built over 3 years. But what she didn't know, the man silently standing beside her in the shadows, wasn't a random stranger. He'd been watching her for 8 months, and tonight he would stake his entire empire to save a woman unaware she was in the midst of a life-or-death battle. Like and comment the city you're viewing to let me know how far this story has progressed. And don't go anywhere, because things won't be what you think. The night Zaria Bennett's life ended, it was raining so hard she could barely see her own hands. Not the kind of rain that cleans things, the kind that finds every crack in a person and pries it open wider. She stood at the floor-length window of the Grand Seorac's 32nd floor ballroom and watched the city blur behind the glass like a watercolor painting someone had ruined by accident. Below, the Han River was swollen and black. She pressed her fingertip against the cold pane and thought, not for the first time in the past 3 years, that Seoul was the most beautiful city she had ever been afraid to love. "You look nervous." Min Jae's voice came from behind her, smooth, practiced. The voice that had once made her feel chosen. She turned. He was already adjusting his cufflinks, not looking at her. He did that a lot now. Small adjustments, small distances. She told herself it was the pressure of his promotion. She told herself a lot of things. "I'm fine," she said. He glanced at her dress, deep burgundy, the one he'd said looked expensive without trying, and something passed across his face that she almost caught. Almost. "Don't embarrass me tonight," he said. "Chairman Park's family will be here. His daughter specifically asked to meet the architect." He said it gently. That was the cruelest part. Zaria nodded and turned back to the window. Behind her reflection, she could see the ballroom filling up. 500 guests, maybe more. The women wore jewelry that could fund her entire childhood neighborhood in Chicago's South Side. The men shook hands with the precision of people who had spent decades learning exactly how much pressure to apply. She did not belong here, and she had known it from the first week. But she had the work. That was supposed to be enough. The Hanwoo Park Architectural Fellowship had brought her to Seoul 18 months ago, the most competitive design grant in Asia, accepting 6 architects globally each cycle. Out of 4,700 applicants, Zaria had read the acceptance letter 4 times before she allowed herself to cry. Her mother had framed it. Her grandmother had made her take a photo holding it next to the framed picture of their old house on 63rd Street, the one with the crumbling porch steps that Zaria had sketched redesigns for when she was 9 years old. She had earned this. That much was not a story she'd told herself. The Minwoo Tower Commission came 3 months in, a 40-story mixed-use development in Yongsan District, her first major solo project in Korea. She'd spent 6 months sleeping 4 hours a night, revising load-bearing calculations until her eyes burned, arguing with contractors 3 times her age who initially refused to take her seriously. She'd won them over the way she won everyone over eventually, by knowing more than them and being too stubborn to pretend otherwise. Min Jae had come into her life at the project's midpoint. He'd been assigned as the corporate liaison between the Hanwoo Park Group and the fellowship program. Charming and educated and precise in a way that felt, for a long time, like safety. She should have recognized the performance. She'd seen it before. Different city, same architecture. The dinner began without incident. Zaria sat at the secondary table, not the chairman's table, never the chairman's table, and made conversation in Korean that was good enough now to get her through an entire evening without switching to English. She talked with a structural engineer from Busan about earthquake resistance in high-rise foundations. She complimented the wife of a government minister on her jade earrings. She ate slowly and watched the room and kept her face arranged in the specific expression she'd learned for occasions like this: present, pleasant, professionally warm. Around 9:30, the speeches began. Chairman Park Dae-won took the podium, 70 years old and built like a man who had never once in his life accepted the word no. His white hair was immaculate. His suit probably cost more than Zaria's annual fellowship stipend. He spoke in rapid formal Korean about legacy and vision and the corporation's 40-year contribution to Seoul's skyline, and Zaria translated enough of it in her head to understand the gist. We built this city and we intend to keep building it. Then Min Jae's name came up. She straightened slightly. My executive vice president of development, Chairman Park said, has shown exceptional dedication to this organization's future, particularly in his recent commitment to our new partnership with the Dongsung Group. Applause moved through the room. And this partnership, Park continued, will be celebrated tonight with the announcement of a merger that our families have worked toward for several years. Something shifted in the room's air pressure. Zaria felt it before she understood it. My daughter, Park Soo-yeon, and Min Jae-hyun will be married this spring. The applause this time was immediate and loud. Zaria sat very still. At the chairman's table, Min Jae was standing, smiling. Next to him, a woman in a silver dress that caught every light in the room was already reaching for his hand. The chairman's daughter. She was extraordinarily beautiful, and she was looking at Min Jae the way Zaria had once looked at the Seoul skyline from her fellowship apartment balcony on the first morning, like something that had always belonged to her. Min Jae raised his glass. He did not look toward Zaria's table. Not once. She picked up her water glass, set it down, picked it up again. Her hand was steady. She was very proud of that later. In the moment, being steady was the only power she had, and she used it. She excused herself quietly and walked to the restroom and stood over the sink with the tap running cold and looked at her own face in the mirror for a long time. Brown skin, natural hair pulled back, eyes that her mother called old soul eyes, and her college roommate had called the kind of eyes that see too much and say too little. She didn't cry. She had not cried in front of anyone since she was 14 years old at her father's hospital bedside, and that record was going to hold tonight. What she felt instead was something colder than grief, something that had been sitting in her stomach for weeks, maybe months, and was now simply being acknowledged. She had known. Some part of her had known. She just hadn't wanted to be right. She dried her hands and straightened her dress and walked back out. The second blow came 18 minutes later, and it was not about Min Jae at all. She was crossing the outer corridor toward the ballroom when she heard her name, not spoken by a guest, but broadcast. A flat-screen monitor mounted near the coat check area was displaying a KSN news alert, the red banner running across the bottom of the screen. Hanwoo Park Fellowship, architect under investigation. Alleged theft of proprietary design files. Immigration authorities notified. Her photograph was on the screen. Her name. Her project. She stopped walking. Someone bumped into her from behind and apologized without looking. She stood in the middle of the corridor and read the crawl 3 times. Alleged theft of confidential architectural specifications. Unauthorized transmission of proprietary files to overseas entities. Visa irregularities flagged by the Ministry of Justice. The Hanwoo Park Group confirms the fellowship participant has been suspended pending investigation. The room kept moving around her. Waitstaff with trays, guests in tuxedos, someone laughing very loudly at something near the elevator bank. Her phone buzzed. Then again. Then continuously. She looked at the screen. 15 missed calls. Emails flooding in. Her Korean law contact, her fellowship coordinator, 3 journalists she didn't recognize. A text from Min Jae's number. Please don't make a scene. This doesn't have to get worse. She turned the phone face down. She thought about what she knew, cataloging it the way she cataloged a structural problem. Systematically, without panic, working from the load points outward. She had not stolen anything. She had transmitted files to no one outside the approved project server. Her visa was current. She had documentation for every step of her work on the Minwoo Tower, 3 separate backup drives, and a fellowship oversight file that was updated monthly. None of that would matter tonight. Tonight, what mattered was that her face was on the news. She was out on the corridor outside the ballroom's main entrance when one of the hotel's assistant managers approached her, young, uncomfortable, clearly doing something he'd been instructed to do and hadn't slept well enough to handle gracefully. Ms. Bennett, he said in careful English, I've been asked to inform you that your access to the corporate residential floors has been temporarily suspended. The hotel's management wishes to cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation. My things, she said. A representative will assist you in retrieving essential items tomorrow morning. I have a laptop in that room with 2 years of project files. I understand, I have medication in that room. He flinched. I'm very sorry, Ms. Bennett. This comes from the building's ownership. I can't. She walked away from him mid-sentence, not out of rudeness, because the alternative was putting her hands on his collar and asking him to look her in the face and say that again, and she was not going to do that. She was not going to give anyone in this building a single frame of footage they could use. She found a service exit. Outside, the rain was a physical thing. It hit her like a wall. The burgundy dress was soaked in approximately 30 seconds, and she stood in the narrow delivery alley behind the Grand Seorak and let it happen because there was nowhere to go, and she did not know what to do with her hands. She did not have an umbrella. She did not have her coat. She had her phone. Now showing a frozen bank notification, she opened with numb fingers to confirm what she already knew. Account access suspended pending verification request. She put the phone in her dress pocket. She stood in the rain. Somewhere above her, through the sealed glass of the ballroom, music was playing. String quartet, probably. Very elegant, very controlled. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She pressed her back against the marble wall, tilted her face up into the rain, and breathed through her nose the way her high school track coach had taught her to breathe through the last 200 meters of a race that was already half lost. You don't stop because it hurts. You stop when it's over. This was not over, but she allowed herself in the empty alley to finally feel the full weight of the evening pressing down on her ribs, the engagement she had believed in, the work she had given everything for, the country she had chosen, had genuinely chosen, and the belonging she had almost convinced herself was real. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. Her shoulders shook once, twice. A handkerchief appeared in her peripheral vision. She lowered her hands. A man was standing perhaps 4 feet away from her, close to the alley wall, far enough from the downspout that the rain was reaching him only at an angle. He was not looking at her. He was looking out at the far end of the alley with an expression that suggested he had been standing there longer than she'd been crying and had no particular intention of drawing attention to the fact. The handkerchief was white, very clean, extended toward her without comment. She stared at it. "I'm not going to use a stranger's handkerchief," she said. Her voice came out lower than she intended, rougher. "It's clean," he said. Korean accented English, unhurried. He still wasn't looking at her. "That's not really the point." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She didn't take it. He didn't retract it. They remained in that strange negotiation for several seconds while rain pounded the asphalt around them. She finally registered what he looked like. Mid-40s, possibly. Dark coat of a quality that had no business being in a delivery alley. Still, contained features. The kind of face that had trained itself not to react. He wasn't tall in a way that drew attention, but he stood like someone who had never once in his life wondered whether he was allowed to take up space. "This isn't a place for hotel guests," she said. "No," he said again. "Then what are you doing here?" He turned to look at her then, and it was the first time she felt the specific quality of his attention. The way it landed on her like something measured, not unkind, not interested in the way men were sometimes interested in her when they had no right to be. Something else entirely. Assessing, yes, but also something that looked, on closer inspection, almost like recognition. Before she could push further, she heard it. The sound came from the alley's entrance, low and precise, not the hum of passing traffic, but the coordinated idle of multiple engines cutting simultaneously. She turned. 7 black sedans had materialized at the alley's mouth, not parked, positioned. The distinction mattered, and some trained part of her urban planning mind noted it even now. The way they blocked the lane in an interlocking pattern that was geometrically deliberate. Doors opened. Men emerged. 12 of them, perhaps more behind. All in dark suits, all moving with the specific economy of people who had practiced this exact choreography until it became unconscious. They formed a corridor from the cars to where the 2 of them stood, and as one, in a motion so synchronized it made her breath catch, they bowed. Not to her. "Chairman Kang." The man beside her accepted this with the slight tilt of his head, of someone acknowledging a fact rather than receiving praise. He tucked the handkerchief back into his breast pocket. She still hadn't taken it. and turned to face her fully for the first time. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me nothing," she said. "I don't know you." "No, but I know the people who destroyed your life tonight." He said it without drama, the way a surgeon might name a fracture. "I have spent 8 months building a case against them, gathering evidence, identifying networks, waiting for the correct moment." He paused. "Tonight, you walked directly into the center of everything I've been working toward." The rain kept falling. Zaria looked at the 12 men, looked at the cars, looked back at the man who had offered her a handkerchief while an army waited 30 feet away. Her mouth was dry despite the downpour. "What's your name?" she said. "Kang Seong-hwan." The name registered. Not immediately. She'd been in Korea long enough to know the business hierarchies, but she'd never had reason to connect the name to a face because the face was famously absent from every public record. The investment chairman who appeared on no boards, gave no interviews, attended no galas. The man that other powerful men spoke about in the particular tone reserved for things they were afraid of. "Why would you help me?" she said. He looked at her steadily. Behind him, his men remained motionless in the rain, hands at their sides, eyes forward. "Because," Kang said, "there is evidence buried in your architectural files that you don't know exists, evidence that several very powerful people will kill to destroy. Which means," he let the pause land precisely, "that tonight, Ms. Bennett, whether you choose to come with me or not, you are already in the middle of this." Zaria stood in the rain and felt the weight of that settle into her bones. She thought about the frozen bank account, the news crawl with her face on it, the hotel room full of her work that she could no longer access, the fiancé raising his glass at the chairman's daughter while 500 people applauded. She thought about the backup drives she always kept, habit of a woman who had learned early that nobody was going to protect her work for her. She had one in her purse right now. She always had one in her purse. She looked at Kang Seong-hwan. "What kind of evidence?" she said. And he told her, and the city lights reflected in the rain-soaked alley as Zaria Bennett made the first decision of what would become the most dangerous year of her life, not because she trusted him, and not because she wasn't afraid, but because the alternative was standing in the rain alone until someone less principled found her first. She straightened her spine. She pushed her soaked hair back from her face. "I want access to my own files," she said. "Everything I built on that project. And I want it in writing that I'm not your property." Kang Song-hwan studied her for a moment with that precise, measuring attention. Then something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, but was the structural precursor to one. "You negotiate in a rain-soaked dress with no coat in an alley," he said. "I negotiate wherever I'm standing," Zaria said. "Are we doing this or not?" He reached into his coat pocket and extended the handkerchief again. This time she took it. She would not know until much later what taking it meant. She would not know, walking toward those black sedans with her spine straight and her jaw set and her heart beating at approximately twice its resting rate, that Kang Seong-hwan had been waiting 8 months for exactly this moment, and that the woman who had arrived in the alley broken was already, in the most important ways, not broken at all. She would not know any of that yet. All she knew was that somewhere behind those sealed ballroom windows, Min Jae was giving a toast, and her name was on a news crawl, and she had no money and no home and no country that wanted her tonight. What she had was a backup drive, and now apparently an alliance with the most dangerous man in Seoul. The sedan door closed behind her. The city disappeared into the rain, and deep inside the servers of the Minwoo Tower project files, encrypted, buried, invisible to everyone including Zaria herself, the evidence that would bring down an empire waited quietly in the blueprints of a building she had poured her entire life into. Neither of them knew yet what it would cost to retrieve it. The sedan smelled like cedar and machine oil, and something cold underneath both. Not unpleasant, just precise. Clinical in the way expensive things sometimes were when they belonged to people who didn't need to perform comfort for anyone. Zaria sat with her back straight and her wet dress soaking through to the leather seat beneath her and watched Seoul slide past the tinted window in streaks of neon and rain. Nobody spoke. The man called Kang Seong-hwan sat on the opposite side of the rear cabin with a leather portfolio open across his knee, reading something by the thin light above the partition with the focus of a person who had learned to work in whatever time he had, wherever he happened to be. She had questions. She was saving them. The drive took 40 minutes. She tracked the route by landmark, Yongsan, then north through Seongbuk-dong, then up into the kind of residential elevation where the houses stopped being visible from the road entirely. The estate gate was stone and steel and opened before the first sedan reached it, which told her the perimeter had eyes she couldn't see from the car. Inside, the compound was nothing like what the word compound suggested. No excess, no theatrical display. A main structure of dark wood and reinforced glass set into the hillside like it had been grown there, surrounded by enough space that the nearest building was a converted outbuilding that she identified, instinctively and almost against her will, as structurally sound in a way that most residential construction wasn't. Whoever had built this had cared about permanence over aesthetics. She noted that, filed it. A woman met them at the entrance, late 50s, severe posture, the kind of efficiency that read as former military before it read as anything else. She looked at Zaria with an expression that communicated neither welcome nor hostility, pure assessment. "Ms. Kim will see to what you need," Kang said, already moving toward the interior. "I need my files," Zaria said to his back. He stopped. "I need access to the Minwoo Tower project server. Tonight. If what you're telling me is true, that there's something buried in those blueprints, then I need to see it myself. I'm not going to take your word for what's inside my own work." He turned halfway. The hallway light caught the angle of his jaw. "Tonight you sleep," he said. Tomorrow we talk about the files." "I don't sleep well in strangers' houses." "Neither do I," he said, "but we both do it anyway." He looked at Ms. Kim, the East Room, "and get her something dry to wear." He walked away without waiting for her response, which was either arrogance or efficiency, and she didn't have enough information yet to determine which. Ms. Kim led her through corridors that were spare and deliberate. No decorative objects, no family photographs, the occasional framed topographical map of a region she didn't immediately recognize. The East Room turned out to be larger than her fellowship apartment had been, with a window that looked out over the hillside and the distant glitter of the city below. Zaria sat on the edge of the bed and didn't sleep for approximately 4 hours. She spent the first hour going through the backup drive in her head. Not the physical drive, which she hadn't dared plug into anything in this building, but the mental map she kept of every file, every layer, every version of the Minwoo Tower blueprints. If something was hidden in there, she should have seen it. She had lived in those files for 18 months. She had revised and subdivided and recalibrated every structural layer until she knew the building the way she knew her own spine. What she kept arriving at was the sublevel. Sublevel 3. The underground utility infrastructure that she had designed to specification and then handed off to the Hanwoo Park Group's internal engineering team for the final integration phase. Standard practice. She hadn't thought twice about it, but that was the one section of the project where the final files she'd submitted differed, minimally but measurably, from her original designs. She'd assumed it was the engineering team's standard modifications. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what kind of man spent 8 months building a case in silence against the most powerful corporate family in Korea. Then she thought about whether she was an idiot for being in his house. The ratio of those two thoughts, and which one won out, told her something about where she was after tonight. She slept for maybe 90 minutes, dreamless, the kind of sleep that wasn't rest so much as the body insisting on a brief ceasefire. At 6 in the morning, Ms. Kim knocked and left a tray outside the door without entering. Tea, plain rice, a folded set of clothes, dark slacks, and a gray sweater, both in approximately the right size, which was either coincidence or preparation, and she was becoming increasingly confident it wasn't coincidence. By 7, she was dressed and in the corridor. She found the room she was looking for by following the voices. The door was partially open. Through it, she could hear 2 men speaking in rapid Korean. Not the formal register of business conversation, but the clipped, overlapping rhythm of people who had worked together long enough to skip the connective tissue of sentences. She caught fragments. A name, Shin Dae-woo. A number, 48 hours. A phrase she had to parse twice before it resolved. The prosecutor's office has already been contacted. She pushed the door open. 3 men around a long table. Kang at the head, no jacket now, shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms. A stillness about him that seemed different in daylight. Not softer, but more defined. To his left, a man roughly her age with the kind of angular face that looked like it had been broken at least once and reset slightly wrong, typing with 2 fingers on a laptop with a velocity that suggested profound contempt for keyboards. To Kang's right, an older man she didn't recognize, silver-haired, reading glasses pushed up into his hair, looking at her arrival with the particular displeasure of someone who had been expecting an interruption and still found it inconvenient. "The files," Zaria said. "I want to see them." The older man looked at Kang. "She should not be in here," he said in English, clearly for her benefit. "Then tell me something that suggests I should be somewhere else," Zaria said. Kang didn't move. "Park Soo-chul," he said, indicating the older man. "My legal advisor. And this is Lee Hyun-jun." The angular-faced man didn't look up from the keyboard. "My head of intelligence?" "You have a head of intelligence," she said. "I have several," Kang said without irony. "I need access to the Minwoo Tower project server, not your copy of the files. The original server, the one I uploaded to." Lee Hyun-jun looked up for the first time. His eyes moved over her with the same quality of attention as Kang's, but with considerably less neutrality. This was the look of someone who had read a file about her and was now checking the file against the actual person and finding the comparison sufficient rather than impressive. "The original server was wiped at 11:47 last night," he said. "Within 20 minutes of the news broadcast." Zaria processed that. "My backup drive," she said. She pulled it from her pocket. She'd slept with it in her palm, which was possibly excessive and also completely rational, and set it on the table. "Everything is here. Every version, every layer." Park Soo-chul leaned forward. "We cannot." "She's the architect," Kang said, and something in the way he said it ended the sentence. Lee Hyun-jun produced a clean laptop from a case under the table. Sealed, she noted, no network indicator light, and slid it toward her. She plugged in the drive, pulled up the file architecture, rotated the screen so they could all see. "Sublevel 3, she said. "Here." She navigated to the utility infrastructure layer. "This is my original. This is what I submitted." She split the screen, pulling up the version that had been published in the Fellowship's official project documentation before the server wipe. "These are different." The room was quiet. Lee Hyun-jun moved around the table and stood behind her without asking permission, which she allowed because the alternative was arguing about proximity when she needed his eyes on the screen. "Column grid reference 7C through 9F, he said after approximately 45 seconds. "The dimensions here aren't structural," Zaria said. "In my original, this section is utility routing, HVAC, electrical conduit, waste management, standard for this depth. In the published version, there's an additional chamber, roughly 40 square meters, no utility connection, no labeled purpose." "A room," Lee Hyun-jun said. "A vault," Zaria said. "Built to my specs so it would pass inspection as utility infrastructure. But it's not. Someone used my blueprint as the exterior architecture and inserted a core I didn't design." Park Soo-chul removed his reading glasses from his hair and put them on and looked at the screen for a long time. "This is the location," Kang said. Not a question. "If we're right," Lee Hyun-jun said, "what's in that room is why 11 people connected to the original project development team are no longer alive." Zaria turned to look at him. "Define no longer alive," she said. "Accidents, suicides, one disappearance, over an 18-month period." He held her gaze. "Overlapping entirely with your time on the project." She felt the specific cold that wasn't temperature. "No one told me," she said. "No one told you because no one connected it until 4 months ago," Kang said. "When my organization began tracking the financial flows from the Hanwoo Park Group's offshore accounts and found a pattern of payments that correlated with each death." She looked down at the blueprint, at the chamber she hadn't built, at the 40 square meters of space in the foundation of a building she had poured her life into. "What's in it?" she said. "Documents," Kang said. Physical records. Decades of transactions that exist nowhere else. Payments to government officials, prosecutors, police commissioners. Contracts for projects that should have been impossible to win without bribery. Evidence of at least 3 infrastructure collapses that were covered up. Buildings that fell because corners were cut, and the families who lost people were paid off and silenced. He paused. And we believe records of the original land seizures that funded the corporation's first decade. Land that was taken from residents by coordinated, falsified debt documentation. The room held that. Chairman Park has spent 40 years building a paperless empire, Lee Hyun-jun said. Except apparently he kept records. The kind of man who keeps records like that either does it out of paranoia or because he intends to use them as leverage against everyone else who's dirty. Mutually assured exposure. And now he wants those records back, Zaria said. He wants them destroyed, Kang said. There's a difference. If he retrieves them, he retains leverage. If he destroys them, he loses it but survives. He's chosen survival. Which is why I'm a convenient scapegoat, she said. If I'm the architect who stole plans and transmitted them to outside parties, then any anomalies in the building become my crime, not his. Yes, Kang said, and the vault. If questions arise about the vault, you designed it. She pushed back from the table, stood, walked to the window, same view as her room, the city still there below, Seoul in morning light looking like nothing terrible had ever happened in it. I want immunity in writing, she said, from someone with the actual authority to grant it. Not your legal advisor. I want a federal prosecutor. That, Park Soo-chul said from the table, is considerably more complicated than, I know it's complicated. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for protected. She turned from the window. If I'm helping you access a building that is directly connected to at least 11 deaths, I need to know that when this is over, I can get on a plane to Chicago without being arrested at the gate. So either you have that capacity or you don't. And if you don't, I need to know now. Kang looked at her. I have that capacity, he said. I want to see it. You'll see it when I trust that you won't take what I show you and use it to disappear. You think I'd disappear? I think, he said, measured, without hostility, that you are a highly intelligent person who has spent 24 hours being systematically destroyed by people with more institutional power than you. Disappearing would be rational. She stared at him. Then we have a trust problem, she said. We have a starting point, he said, which is different. The tension in the room had a particular texture. Not the explosive kind, but the structural kind, the kind that exists in a bridge cable under load. Everything holding. Nothing comfortable about it. It was Lee Hyun-jun who broke it, not with diplomacy, but with the blunt instrument of new information. There's a problem, he said, looking at his phone. His voice had changed. Not panic. The man didn't seem built for panic, but a compression that she was already learning to read as urgency stripped of effect. Shin Dae-woo's office issued a statement 30 minutes ago. Who is Shin Dae-woo? Zaria said. The Deputy Prosecutor General, Kang said. He hadn't moved, but something in his posture had. He's announced a formal criminal investigation, Lee Hyun-jun said. Theft of architectural intellectual property, potential espionage, visa fraud. He looked up. Ms. Bennett, there is now an international arrest flag on your passport. As of He checked the screen. 6:42 this morning. She felt it land. I can't leave, she said. No. And I can't stay visible. No. She looked at the backup drive still plugged into the laptop, at the blueprint of the building that contained a room she hadn't built, at the face of a man she'd met in an alley 8 hours ago who had either saved her life or inserted himself into it for reasons she hadn't fully mapped. All right, she said. Her voice came out flat and steady, and she was aware that the steadiness was a choice, not a feeling. Then we figure out how to get into that building. Park Soo-chul made a sound that was not quite a word. The Minwoo Tower is scheduled to open for business in 3 weeks, Lee Hyun-jun said. Before then, the corporation is hosting a global partners conference. International investors, government officials, the full consortium of the Dongsung merger partnership. The building will be accessible for a pre-opening inspection tour on the 14th, 6 days from today. Accessible meaning what level of security? Accessible meaning every surveillance system in the building will be active. There will be private security contracted through the Hanwoo Park Group's own firm, and the deputy prosecutor's office will almost certainly have personnel present given the current investigation. She absorbed this. So the window, she said, is 6 days. The window, Lee Hyun-jun said, is technically already closed. I'm simply telling you what the calendar says. She pulled the backup drive from the laptop, put it back in her pocket, closed the blueprint files. I designed that sublevel, she said. I know every access point, every maintenance corridor, every emergency egress route in that building down to the millimeter. Whatever security they've put in, they built it on top of my architecture. That, Kang said, and there was something behind his voice that she might have identified as respect if she'd been paying less attention to everything else, is exactly why you're here. The day moved fast after that. Lee Hyun-jun produced floor plans, copies, partial ones, the kind that existed in municipal approval filings and were therefore technically public. And she spent 4 hours at the table cross-referencing them against her own files, marking the discrepancies, rebuilding in her head the true structure of the building versus what the official record showed. Kang moved in and out of the room, sometimes on the phone in Korean too rapid and low for her to follow, sometimes simply reading, once standing at the window for 20 minutes in a silence that suggested thinking rather than absence. She watched him when she could do it without being obvious. What she built was a picture assembled from fragments. The men who reported to him moved with the particular ease of people who had operated under pressure for long enough that the pressure had become background. No one raised their voice, no one seemed uncertain. But there were micro-negotiations happening constantly. A look between Lee Hyun-jun and a man who came in at noon, a pause before Kang answered a question that told her the question had more variables than it appeared. This was not a simple organization, and this was not a simple man. In the early afternoon, Ms. Kim brought food that nobody formally sat down to eat, and Zaria consumed without tasting while she worked. At some point, she became aware that Kang had sat down across from her and was watching her map the access corridors. "You haven't asked me why," he said. "Why what?" "Why I've spent 8 months on this." She kept her eyes on the blueprint. "I assumed you'd tell me when you wanted to." "Most people ask immediately." "Most people let the question lead them," she said. "I'd rather know what you do before I decide whether your reasons matter." A pause. "The land seizures," he said. "The ones I mentioned. One of the neighborhoods they took, Galhyeon-dong, in 1987. The residents were given falsified debt notices and removed within 60 days. The families received no compensation and no recourse." Another pause, this one different in weight. "My mother's family had a house on that street." She looked up. He was looking at the table. "I was 4 years old," he said. "What I remember is my grandmother at a kitchen table that was in a different kitchen than it had been the week before. And I remember that she never stopped being angry about it." He looked up, met her eyes. "I built my organization around a lot of things. That is the one I don't talk about publicly." She held the look. "Why tell me?" she said. "Because you asked me why you should trust me. This is part of the answer." She didn't say anything for a moment, didn't look away. "You have a personal stake in this outcome," she finally said. "That's useful information. It also means you might make decisions based on what you need from this rather than what's actually right." "Yes," he said. "At least you know it," she said, and went back to the blueprint. That was the closest thing to a truce they reached on day 1. The night brought the first threat. She was in the East Room, backup drive in hand, going over sub-level access coordinates on paper. She'd stopped trusting anything with a network connection when she heard movement in the outer corridor that was different from the household rhythms she'd already cataloged. 2 sets of footsteps, not Ms. Kim's measured pace. Faster. Then Kong's voice, brief and low, and then silence of a specific density. She opened the door. Lee Hyun-jun was in the hallway. He turned and looked at her, and she knew before he spoke. "Someone accessed the municipal building permit archive 2 hours ago," he said. "The specific files, Minwoo Tower sub-level approvals. It wasn't us. Hanwoo Park. Or someone working for them. We don't know yet what they took, but the search parameters match what you've been cross-referencing all day." He held her gaze. "They know someone is looking at the sub-level. They may not know it's you, yet." She thought about what that meant, about the 11 people who were no longer alive. "How long before they know where I am?" she said. He didn't answer right away, which was itself an answer. Down the hall, Kang came out of a room she hadn't been in, phone in hand, and looked at her with that measuring attention, and she read in it something she recognized from the worst moments of difficult projects, the expression of a person recalculating a timeline that had just gotten shorter. "We moved the operational window," he said. "Not 6 days." "How many?" she said. He looked at her steadily. 72 hours, he said. "Maybe less." She thought about the vault. The 40 square meters under a building she knew better than anyone alive. The documents that could bring down a 40-year empire. The dead who had never seen justice. The fact that she was standing in a hallway in Seoul with an arrest flag on her passport and a backup drive in her hand that was currently the most dangerous object in the country. She thought about Min Jae raising his glass. She thought about her grandmother's framed photo of the acceptance letter. She thought about 11 people who had made the mistake of being in the way. "Show me the security schematics," she said. "Everything you have. Right now." Kang held the door open. She walked through it. And somewhere in the Minwoo Tower, in a vault built inside her own blueprints, 40 years of buried crimes waited, while the people who had committed them were already, at this very moment, moving to make sure no one would ever reach. The security schematics covered the entire surface of the long table and still weren't enough. Lee Hyun-jun had spread them in overlapping layers. Municipal filings, contractor submissions, internal Hanwoo Park documents that Zaria chose not to ask how he'd obtained, and she stood over them with her arms braced on the table edge and went through them the way she went through any structural problem, from the foundation up, from the known outward into the uncertain. The building she had designed was underneath all of it. She could feel it the way you feel a song you know well played in a different key, recognizable in its bones, wrong in its surface. "The main security hub is here," Lee Hyun-jun said, tapping a point on the ground floor schematic. "Contracted through Daesun Private Security. 40 personnel minimum during the partners' conference period. That number goes up if the prosecutor's office sends observers." "The conference is in 72 hours, Kang said. He was standing at the far end of the table, reading a separate document, voice level. "Which means setup personnel will be in the building starting tomorrow morning." "Setup personnel are the window," Zaria said. Both men looked at her. "During active event setup, you have contractors, AV crews, catering, decorators. The security system has to accommodate constant legitimate entry and exit, or it shuts down operations entirely. Hanwoo Park won't want that visibility. They'll run reduced surveillance protocols on the loading bays and secondary access points for a 12 to 18-hour window while setup is active." Lee Hyun-jun's jaw shifted slightly. Not quite acknowledgement, but the muscular precursor to it. "The maintenance corridor on sublevel 2, she continued, pointing without touching the schematic, connects to the utility shaft that runs adjacent to the vault chamber. In my original design, that shaft is accessible from the loading bay infrastructure on the building's north face. If they didn't modify it, they didn't," Lee Hyun-jun said. "The north face utility access appears unchanged in the contractor submissions. Then we don't go through the front. We go through the building's own bones." Kang set down the document he was reading and came to stand at her side of the table. He looked at the schematic for a long moment. She was aware of his proximity the way she was aware of structural weight. Not uncomfortable, simply present, something to account for. "You'd need to know the exact corridor routing from memory," he said. "Once you're in that shaft, there's no light, no map, no way to reference." "I designed it," she said. "I don't need a map." He looked at her. In the particular silence that followed, she understood he was not doubting her. He was measuring what it cost her to say that. The distinction mattered, and she wasn't sure why she noticed it. "Who goes in?" she said. "You," Lee Hyun-jun said. "Myself. One other." He glanced at Kang. "Not me," Kang said. Zaria looked at him. "My face ends the operation the moment anyone sees it," he said, without apparent ego in the statement. "I coordinate from outside. Lee goes in with you." "The one other," she said. "Who?" Lee Hyun-jun pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward her. A photograph. A woman, late 30s, close-cropped hair, the kind of face that didn't offer anything unnecessary. Park Ji-yeon, he said, former intelligence service. She's been with us 3 years. What's her role? Extraction and counter-surveillance. If something goes wrong inside the building, she gets you out. And if something goes wrong outside, a beat. Then we improvise, Lee Hyun-jun said, in a tone that suggested improvisation was not his preferred methodology, and he was aware of how insufficient the word was. She looked at the schematic, the vault, the corridor, the 18-hour window inside which everything would need to happen. I need 4 hours of sleep, she said, and I need to spend 2 hours tomorrow morning with these schematics alone before anyone asks me anything. Neither man argued. She wasn't sure if that was because they respected the request or because they'd already learned that arguing with her on process was structurally inefficient. She went back to the East Room and lay down, and this time did not think about Min Jae or the newscast or the frozen accounts. She thought about load-bearing walls and shaft dimensions and the smell of new concrete in a building that was still becoming itself. She slept 4 hours and dreamed about her grandmother's kitchen table. The morning arrived gray and cold, and for approximately 40 minutes she had the schematics and a cup of tea and no one else in the room. And she used the time the way a surgeon uses preoperative quiet, not to calm down, but to go through every step until it existed in her body as much as in her mind. It was at 9:14 in the morning, while she was cross-referencing the sub-level 2 corridor routing against her memory of the original utility placement, that Park Ji-yeon walked into the room and changed everything. Not intentionally, not dramatically. The way the worst things usually happened. Quietly, sideways, through a door you'd left open because you hadn't known it mattered. Ji-yeon came in with a folder, set it on the table, opened it to a specific page and said, "The updated personnel manifest for the conference. Lee wanted you to see the security assignment rotations." Zaria looked at the page. She looked at it for what felt like a long time, but was probably 6 seconds. A name on the security personnel list. Third from the bottom, under the heading of Internal Corporate Liaison Officers assigned to coordinate with Daesun Private Security. Min Jae-hyun. She set down the tea. "He's the corporate liaison," she said. Her voice came out level. She was learning to be suspicious of her own levelness. Ji-yeon looked at the page, then at her. "For the security coordination, yes. He was appointed last week. Meaning he'll be in the building during the entire setup window." "Yes." She folded her hands on the table and looked at the wall above the schematics and did the specific kind of arithmetic that wasn't numbers. Min Jae knew her work. He had been her corporate liaison for the entire Minwoo Tower project. He had attended construction walkthroughs with her. He knew the access corridors because she had walked him through them. He knew her methodology because he had watched her apply it for 18 months. And he was now positioned inside the exact operational window they were planning to use. "Does Kang know?" she said. "He's reviewing it now." She stood up and walked to the door and down the corridor to the room she'd come to think of as the operations center, and she opened the door without knocking. Kang was at the table. Lee Hyun-jun was standing. Both of them looked up with the expression of people mid-conversation about something they'd been about to bring to her. "Min Jae," she said. "Yes," Kang said. "This isn't coincidence." "No," he said. "It's not." She walked to the table and put both hands flat on it and looked at Kang directly. "When did you know he was part of this?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "I had suspicions 4 months ago," Kang said. "Confirmed intelligence 2 weeks ago." She felt it move through her in a wave that wasn't grief and wasn't rage, but was something with the physical properties of both. A slow, seismic thing that started in her sternum and moved outward until it reached her hands, which she pressed harder into the table. 2 weeks ago, she said. "Yes. And you didn't think that was relevant to tell me." "I was not in contact with you 2 weeks ago," he said carefully. "You were not yet part of this. I was already a target 2 weeks ago. You were a subject of the investigation. The distinction, don't." She straightened up. "Don't explain the distinction to me right now. I need a minute." He stopped talking. She gave him credit for that. She turned and walked to the window and stood with her back to both of them, and breathed through her nose and did the track coach breathing and thought about Min-jae walking the sublevel corridors with her, watching where she stopped, what she pointed to, what she thought mattered. 18 months of professional proximity that she had, in her own stupidity, converted into something she'd called intimacy. He had not just been her fiancé. He had been their intelligence asset inside her project. She turned back around. "How much does he know about the vault specifically?" she said. Lee Hyun-jun answered. "We believe he knows it exists. We don't believe he knows the exact location within the sublevel. If he did, Hanwoo Park would have retrieved the documents already. He knows my access methodology," she said. "He knows I design buildings with redundant entry points. He knows I favor north-face utility corridors for maintenance access because I told him that in a conversation over dinner 14 months ago. The room absorbed that." "The north corridor," Ji-yeon said from the doorway. She had followed silently. "Our entry point." "Yes," Zaria said. "They'll be watching it," Lee Hyun-jun said. "Not a question. If Min-jae has been thinking about this the way I've been thinking about it, yes." She looked at the schematics. "They won't know we're coming specifically, but they'll cover the obvious entries because they know how I think." The silence that followed had a different texture from previous silences in this room. This one had the specific weight of a plan that needed to be rebuilt from its foundation. "We find another way in," Lee Hyun-jun said. "There is no other way in that I designed," Zaria said. "That's not modesty. The sublevel access was intentionally limited to 2 points for security purposes: North Utility Corridor and the main sublevel elevator, which requires building management key authorization. We get authorization." "From who?" "The building management team reports directly to Hanwoo Park." Kang had been very still through all of this. He spoke now, quietly. "There's a third option." Both she and Lee Hyun-jun looked at him. "We go through the north corridor," he said, "and we account for the surveillance." "They'll see us," Lee Hyun-jun said. "They'll see someone," Kang said. He looked at Zaria. "You said setup personnel are the window. Contractors moving through that corridor during setup hours are expected traffic." She caught where he was going. "We'd need legitimate setup contractor credentials," she said. "Ji-yeon," Kang said. 12 hours, she said from the doorway, already moving toward the corridor. The operational plan rebuilt itself over the next 4 hours in incremental grinding detail, the kind of work that looked like nothing from the outside and was, in practice, the difference between a thing working and a thing failing catastrophically. Zaria drafted the approach routing from memory. Lee Hyun-jun cross-referenced it against the security rotation manifest. Ji-yeon made calls from a room Zaria wasn't invited into and returned with contractor IDs for a lighting equipment company contracted for the conference that she declined to explain the provenance of. Throughout, Kang moved around the edges of the operation, available but not overbearing, which was itself a kind of management she hadn't encountered often. At 2 in the afternoon, she found herself alone with him in the kitchen for approximately 10 minutes, waiting for water to boil, which was an absurd domestic pause in the middle of everything, and she felt the absurdity of it like a hairline crack in a load-bearing wall. Present, structural, not immediately dangerous. "You should have told me about Min-jae," she said. Not accusatory, factual. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "That's it?" "You're right. I should have. I made a calculation about operational security, and it was the wrong calculation given what you deserve to know." He held her gaze. "I don't have a better explanation than that." She'd been prepared to argue. The absence of defense disarmed her more effectively than any justification would have. "I need to know," she said. "If there are other things you've calculated, I don't need to know." He was quiet for a moment. "There is one thing," he said. She waited. "The prosecutor who issued the arrest flag on your passport, Shin Dae-woo." He looked at the counter. "He is not simply a corrupt official who has been bought by Hanwoo Park. Then what is he? He is the brother-in-law of Chairman Park Dae-won. He has been embedded in the prosecutor's office for 11 years specifically to provide legal cover for the corporation's operations." Kang looked up. "Which means that the investigation against you was not improvised in response to last night. It was a prepared mechanism." It existed before last night. She felt the floor of her understanding shift. They had it ready, she said. The charges, the evidence, the arrest flag. The moment they identified you as a risk. When did they identify me? Another pause. This one longer. We believe, he said, approximately 5 weeks ago. She counted backward. 5 weeks ago, she had been deep in the final revision phase of the sub-level documentation. Routine work, nothing that should have triggered anyone. Except, I submitted a discrepancy report, she said, to the Fellowship Oversight Committee. Minor notation. I flagged that the published specifications didn't match my final submission on two-dimensional references in the sub-level utility section. She heard her own voice go flat. I thought it was a transcription error. I submitted it as a routine correction request. And in doing so, Kang said, you told them that you had seen the difference between your design and what they had built into it. The water boiled. Neither of them moved to address it. She thought about the discrepancy report, a 2-paragraph professional notation, the kind of thing she'd submitted a dozen times on other projects, standard practice. Due diligence. It had been the moment they decided she needed to be destroyed. 5 weeks, she said. They've had 5 weeks to prepare. Yes. And Min Jae spent those 5 weeks engaged to me. The word engaged came out of her mouth and she heard how it sounded. Not romantic, not bitter, just accurate in the way that genuinely terrible truths tended to be accurate. Clean, without sentiment. She picked up the kettle and poured 2 cups and set one in front of Kang and took hers back toward the operations room because staying still was no longer an option her body would support. The plan finalized by 7 that evening. Entry through the North Utility Corridor under contractor cover during the setup window, beginning at 6 a.m. the following day. Lee Hyun-jun and Zaria as primary. Ji-yeon on external counter surveillance, Kang coordinating from a secondary location with 2 additional personnel whose roles she was given in operational terms rather than names, which she accepted because she was learning to pick her battles. At 10 p.m., Kang's phone went off. She was at the far end of the table and she watched his face as he read. Faces had become data to her in the past 48 hours. She read them the way she read structural reports, looking for the stress points. What she saw on Kang's face was controlled, and therefore more alarming than anything uncontrolled would have been. He set the phone down. They've moved the conference, he said. Lee Hyun-jun looked up from his laptop. Forward, Kang said. 12 hours. Pre-opening gala begins tomorrow evening. Setup starts at 4 a.m. Zaria looked at her watch. It was 10:07 p.m. That gives us, Lee Hyun-jun said. 6 hours to get into position, Zaria said. And the setup window shrinks from 12 hours to maybe 4 before the security protocols lock down for the gala. The room processed this. Then Ji-yeon appeared in the doorway, and her expression was different from anything Zaria had seen on her face before, which was notable because Ji-yeon's face was not a place where expressions went to be dramatic. She came in and set her phone on the table screen up, and nobody needed to ask. The phone showed a live feed from an exterior camera. Zaria recognized the compound gate. 3 black vehicles. Not Kang's. Different configuration. Heavier. The kind that carried weight in more than the structural sense. Dasun Security, Ji-yeon said. Private contract, off-register operation. She looked at Kang. Someone told them where we are. The room went very still. Zaria looked at Kang. He was already looking at Lee Hyun-jun. The look between them had a specific quality that she parsed in real time, not surprise, something closer to dread confirming itself. Hyun-jun, Kang said, low. I don't know yet, Lee said. His voice had dropped to something careful. I need 5 minutes. We don't have 5 minutes, Ji-yeon said. Zaria looked at the phone screen. The vehicles hadn't moved yet, holding position at the gate, which meant they hadn't breached the perimeter, which meant there was still time that was measured in something smaller than minutes. How many exits? She said. 3 viable, Ji-yeon said. East Service Road, West Ridge Path on foot, and the underground vehicle access that connects to the Seongbuk residential road network. They'll cover all 3 if they're professional. They are professional, Kang said. Then we split, Zaria said. Everyone looked at her. The files, she said. She held up the backup drive. This is what they want. If I go separately from the rest of you, they have to divide resources. They can't cover all exits at full strength if they're chasing two targets in different directions. You go alone, Ji-yeon said, not approvingly. I go alone, and I get to the Minwoo Tower, Zaria said, because it's the one place I know better than anyone in those vehicles, and it's the one place where the evidence we need is physically located, and in approximately, she looked at her watch. 6 hours the setup window opens, and I am the only person in this room who can navigate that sublevel without a map. Kang crossed the room in 4 steps and stood directly in front of her. If they catch you before you get there, he said. They won't, she said. If they do. She looked at him. Then we both lose. But if I stay here and they breach this compound, we also both lose, and no one else gets hurt in the process. She held the backup drive between them. This is not your operation anymore. It stopped being yours the moment they found this location. His jaw tightened. Not anger. Something harder than anger, the thing underneath it. There is a contact, he said, a former colleague who operates a textile warehouse 2 blocks north of the Minwoo Tower. Her name is Oh Seon-hwa. Tell her the word blueprint, and she will give you whatever you need. Zaria put the drive in her pocket. The East Service Road, Ji-yeon said, already moving. 30 seconds. In the controlled chaos of the next 2 minutes, Ji-yeon pulling a bag from a closet that had clearly been prepped for exactly this contingency, Lee Hyun-jun wiping drives with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done it before, Kang giving instructions in rapid Korean to personnel she heard but didn't see. Zaria did something she hadn't planned. She stopped at the doorway and looked back at Kang. He was watching her. In the middle of everything, in the urgency and the darkness, and the knowledge that armed men were outside the gate, he was watching her with an attention that had none of the calculation of their early interactions. It was something plainer than that, something that cost him to show. She did not say anything. Neither did he. She went through the door. The East Service Road was gravel and unlit, and she ran it in borrowed shoes that were half a size too large and did not fall, which she considered at the time to be the most important achievement of her life up to that point. Ji-yeon took her to a secondary vehicle parked 300 meters down the road and handed her a phone, a transit card, and the address of the textile warehouse. If Lee finds who gave us up, Ji-yeon said, Kong will contact you through this number. And if he doesn't find who gave us up? Ji-yeon's expression was all the answer she gave. Zaria drove. Seoul at midnight was not the city she had arrived in 18 months ago with her fellowship acceptance and her backup drives and her absolute certainty that work was the thing that would hold everything else together. It was the same streets, same neon, same Han River, running black and inevitable to the south. But she was different inside it now, like something had restructured in the past 48 hours, something load-bearing, and she could feel the new configuration settling into place with every kilometer she put between herself and the compound. She thought about the discrepancy report. 2 paragraphs. Due diligence. She thought about Min Jae at the dinner table, asking about her design philosophy, about how she approached underground infrastructure, about why she preferred northern exposures for utility access. She thought about a man sitting across from her in a kitchen at 2 in the afternoon saying, I should have told you, with the specific honesty of someone who had decided that the cost of lying was now higher than the cost of the truth. She parked 6 blocks from the Minwoo Tower and sat in the car and looked at the building she had designed rising against the Seoul night sky, lit from below, its lines exactly what she had drawn 3 years ago on a fellowship application that her mother had framed. The building looked like it had always belonged there. It looked like everything she had ever built anything toward. And somewhere inside it, in a vault constructed from the theft of her own work, was the evidence that had already cost 11 people their lives. Evidence she was now going to walk into alone in 4 hours with a contractor ID that Ji-yeon had produced from a source neither of them had named, through a corridor that Min Jae-hyun knew about, in a building surrounded by people whose employer had spent 5 weeks preparing to destroy her. She was sitting there, hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the tower, when her phone lit up. Not Kong's number. Not Ji-yeon's. A number she didn't recognize, A text message, 5 words. She read it twice, then a third time, because the third time confirmed what the first 2 times had told her, and she needed that confirmation in her body before her mind finished processing what it meant. The text read, Lee Hyun-jun is their man. She sat in the car. Outside, the Minwoo Tower stood against the sky, 40 stories of her own work, and somewhere inside Kang Seong-hwan's compound, the man who had spent 2 days building their operational plan, every entry point, every timing window, every contingency route was. She sat in the car for 43 seconds. She knew it was 43 seconds because she counted them. Not out of panic, out of the specific discipline of a person who had learned that the first 30 seconds after a catastrophic revelation were the most dangerous, the most likely to produce a decision that felt right and was wrong. So she sat and she counted and she looked at the 5 words on the phone screen and let her mind do what it needed to do. Lee Hyun-jun is their man. Every entry point, every timing window, the North Utility Corridor, the contractor ID provenance, the security rotation manifest that he had cross-referenced and annotated and handed back to her with amendments, the compound location itself. All of it moving in one direction. She looked at the Minwoo Tower. Then she called the unknown number. It rang twice and connected to silence. "Who is this?" she said. A voice. Female. Older, she thought, with the specific compression of someone speaking quietly in a space they weren't supposed to be in. "Oh, Seon-hwa," the voice said. The textile warehouse contact, Kang's former colleague. "How did you get this number?" Zaria said. "Kang gave it to me 20 minutes ago. He's been trying to reach you. His phones are compromised." Lee had access to the network architecture. A pause. "He got out. He's alive. He told me to tell you the compound extraction went clean, but they lost 2 men holding the perimeter." Zaria's hand tightened on the phone. Lost meaning. Meaning they stayed behind so the others could get through. The voice was steady. The steadiness of someone delivering this kind of information for the first time was different from the steadiness of someone who had delivered it before. This was the second kind. "Kang is 40 minutes out from my location. He wants you inside the building before he arrives." "The North Corridor is blown," Zaria said. "Lee knows it. Kang knows that too. He says," a pause, as if reading something, "he says you'll know the way that Lee doesn't know you know." She sat with that. Then it arrived, the way structural solutions always arrived for her, not as inspiration, but as recognition, something that had been present all along in the architecture of what she'd built, waiting for the right question. The emergency egress, not a corridor, not a utility shaft. The building's emergency pressurization system, a series of vertical ducts designed to maintain positive air pressure during fire events, preventing smoke infiltration into evacuation routes. She had designed them into the sublevel specifically, running parallel to the main utility shaft but offset by 11 meters. Never discussed with Min-jae because they were code compliance infrastructure, the invisible technical skeleton of the building that architects talked about with engineers and nobody else. Lee Hyun-jun had seen every schematic she'd referenced at the table. He had not seen the pressurization schematics because she had never pulled them. They existed only in the municipal fire code submissions, a separate filing from the structural and utility documentation, and they connected directly to sublevel 3. "Tell Kang I'm going in," she said. 40 minutes is enough." She ended the call before Oh Seon-hwa could respond. She got out of the car. The air was cold and sharp and smelled like exhaust and wet concrete, and somewhere nearby something sweet that she couldn't identify. Seoul at 3:40 in the morning was not empty. It was never fully empty. But the block around the Minwoo Tower was construction quiet, the kind of quiet that had been institutionally imposed through permits and barriers. She walked toward the building. She was wearing dark slacks and a gray sweater and contractor credentials that identified her as an employee of Ilsung Lighting Solutions, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked, she knew, like someone who was supposed to be here. She had spent 18 months being underestimated in this city. Tonight, she was going to use it. The north face of the building was lit and monitored, 2 Daesoon security personnel visible at the loading bay entrance. She didn't look at them as she walked past. She kept her pace steady and her eyes on the building's east face, where the emergency systems access panel was located behind a maintenance barrier she'd specified in the fire code submission as requiring tool-free operation for first responder access. Standard practice. Invisible in plain sight. The panel was exactly where she'd drawn it. She had the cover off in 14 seconds. The duct opening beyond was 60 centimeters wide and vertical. She had known when she designed it that it was technically large enough for a human body. She had not known at the time that she would ever need to confirm this empirically. She confirmed it now. The climb was 31 meters of vertical metal ductwork in total darkness, using the cross-bracing struts she'd specified for structural integrity, and which functioned, she discovered, adequately as a ladder for a person who was willing to accept that adequately was enough. Her shoulders scraped the walls on both sides. The metal was cold in a way that went through her palms and into her wrists. She climbed with her eyes open because closing them made no difference, and she preferred the fiction of visibility. She counted the sub-level access points by feel. Sub-level 1. 2. The third access port, she found the release by memory, a quarter-turn latch she'd specified for maintenance access, and pushed. The duct opened into darkness. She dropped onto concrete and stayed crouched for 3 seconds, listening. The sublevel smelled like new building, concrete curing compound, sealant, the ghost of fresh paint. It was warmer than the duct. She could hear very faintly the mechanical systems running in the walls around her. HVAC, the low-frequency hum of electrical distribution. And nothing else. She oriented herself. The pressurization duct had deposited her 11 meters east of the main utility corridor. She was, if her spatial memory was functioning correctly, and she was going to proceed as though it was because the alternative was unworkable, approximately 30 meters from the chamber. She moved. The sublevel was unlit except for the emergency egress lighting she had designed. Low strips along the floor junctions, dim green, enough to navigate by if you knew what you were looking at. She stayed close to the east wall and moved quickly and did not let herself think about Lee Hyun-jun or what he might have told the people in this building or how much time she had before the setup crews arrived and the noise cover disappeared and the security protocols tightened. She found the chamber at 4:07 a.m. It was not labeled. Of course it wasn't. It presented as a utility junction node, a reinforced door identical in appearance to the HVAC distribution boxes she'd placed at intervals throughout the sublevel. The distinction was the door's weight, which she registered when she found the access panel and pressed it, and the door swung with the resistance of something considerably more substantial than its surface suggested. Beyond it, darkness, then shapes. Filing systems. Floor to ceiling. Industrial metal shelving carrying archive boxes, each labeled with numerical codes, organized with the specific obsessive structure of someone who had spent decades believing these records were both their greatest liability and their most powerful asset. She stood in the doorway and breathed. Her hands were shaking. She noticed it the way she noticed structural things, not with alarm, just as data. Her hands were shaking and her pulse was at a rate that her track coach would have found acceptable for the last 100 meters of a race, and she had approximately 30 minutes before this window closed. She started at the far end of the left shelf and worked systematically. The codes were dates. She understood it within 45 seconds, year-month category, a simple filing architecture that told her whoever had maintained this had prioritized retrieval speed over concealment. The categories were in abbreviated Korean she could mostly parse: financial transactions, government correspondence, contract documentation, personnel. Personnel. She pulled the personnel category spanning 2004 through 2007 and opened the first box. Payments. Names. Amounts. Dates. Cross-referenced to a separate ledger index that she found 2 boxes down. A master key that connected the payment records to the incident records. The building collapses, the covered investigations, the families. Her hands were still shaking, but she was moving faster now. She had brought nothing to carry documents. She had brought the backup drive. She photographed pages with the phone Ji-yeon had given her methodically, without stopping to read what she was capturing, trusting that the camera would hold what her memory couldn't carry. She was on the 3rd box when she heard footsteps, not above her. In the sublevel, close, the particular rhythm of someone who knew where they were going. She closed the box and pressed herself against the shelving and did not breathe. The footsteps stopped outside the chamber door. A voice, male, speaking into a phone in Korean, low and quick. She caught fragments. The word for architect, the word for here, a number she couldn't resolve. Then the door opened. Min Jae-hyun stood in the chamber entrance. He was in a suit, corporate, immaculate. He had come from the gala preparation floors above, she understood. He held a flashlight and a phone. The flashlight found her within 2 seconds. They looked at each other across 30 meters of documented crime. Whatever he had expected to find when he opened this door, it was not her standing in it. She watched the specific sequence move across his face. Shock, then rapid recalibration, then the thing that settled underneath both of them, which was guilt wearing the mask of practicality. "Zaria," he said. "Min Jae," she said. Her voice was level. She was very tired of being level and very aware that it was the only weapon she currently had. "How did you get in?" he said. "I designed the building," she said. "How do you think?" He looked at the open archive boxes, at the phone in her hand. "Give me the phone," he said. "No." "Zaria." He took a step forward. "You don't understand what you're holding." "I understand exactly what I'm holding. I've been photographing it for the past 9 minutes. He stopped, recalculated. She could see it happening in real time, the man she had known doing the math that the man he actually was needed to do. "What do you want?" he said. "I want to know if the engagement was part of it from the beginning," she said, "not to feel something about it. I need to know operationally how long I was a target." Something moved across his face that she could not read and did not try to. 8 months, he said, after you submitted the fellowship application. Hanwoo Park sponsored your selection. She processed that. "They chose me," she said, "for the fellowship. You were the most qualified. They didn't manufacture that." He said it as if it was a concession that mattered. "They chose you because you were the best candidate and the best candidate for what they needed. And you were assigned to watch me." A pause. "I was assigned to liaise," he said. "Don't." "Zaria, don't make it smaller than it was." She kept her eyes on him. "You knew what was in this building when I was still designing it. You knew they'd used my blueprints, and you stayed engaged to me for 8 months after you knew." He stopped. "Were you going to tell them when I found the discrepancy?" Silence. "The report I filed," she said, 5 weeks ago. "Were you the one who told them?" His jaw moved, not words, just the muscle working under the skin. "Yes," he said. The word landed. She felt it land and she let it land and she did not look away from him. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated, confused by the word. "Okay, meaning I have what I needed from this conversation." She lifted the phone. "I have 9 minutes of photographs and your confirmation on audio that the fellowship selection was manipulated and that you reported my discrepancy notice to Hanwoo Park, which means the frame on me collapses the moment this becomes public record." He looked at the phone. He moved. She ran. Not toward the door, toward the shelving. She grabbed the master ledger index in both arms as she passed it, because it was the key that made everything else decodable, and she ran the length of the chamber toward the emergency access port at the far end that she had specified in the fire code submission, and that Min Jae absolutely did not know about because she had never discussed emergency pressurization routing with a corporate liaison. She hit the port release and went through it. Behind her, she heard him shouting, not her name, a single word into his phone, sharp and decisive. She went up instead of down. The pressurization shaft ran vertically in both directions from the sub-level access, and going up meant the lobby-level service infrastructure, which meant the setup crews that were already beginning to arrive at 4:15 in the morning, which meant people and noise and the chaos of a building being prepared for an event. She climbed. Her arms burned. The ledger index was awkward and heavy against her chest, and she gripped it with one forearm and climbed with the other and did not look down. Below her, she heard the access port open. Min Jae had found it. And then the sound of him attempting to follow, and the different sound of a man who had not spent 30 years thinking about how buildings were built, attempting to navigate a space designed for someone who had. She came out in the service infrastructure space behind the lobby's west wall at 4:22 a.m. It was controlled chaos. Lighting technicians, caterers moving equipment on wheeled carts, someone arguing loudly about a floral delivery that had arrived to the wrong entrance. She walked out of the service space and into the lobby periphery and fell into the movement of the setup crews and did not run. She was at the building's front entrance, 10 meters from the revolving door, when the lobby security desk came alive. 3 monitors lit up simultaneously. She caught them in her peripheral vision, camera feeds, and on the central screen, a photograph. Her photograph. The Daesun security officer at the desk was still processing what he was seeing when she went through the revolving door. Outside, Seoul was beginning its earliest gray light. The street was not empty, a delivery truck blocking the adjacent lane, workers on the opposite sidewalk, the ordinary texture of a city at its pre-dawn seam. She was walking fast but not running, covering ground toward the corner, when a hand closed around her arm. She swung without thinking. The hand released. She spun. Kang Seong-hwan stood 2 meters away, one hand raised in a gesture that was both defensive and precise. He was not wearing his coat. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that had bled and dried, and he hadn't addressed it. He looked at her with that measuring attention and took in the ledger index under her arm and the phone in her hand and the fact that she was breathing at a rate that suggested she had recently climbed 30 meters of vertical ductwork. "You're early," she said. "You were faster than I expected," he said. "We need to move," she said. "Min Jae is in the building. He knows I was in the vault. He called someone." Kong was already moving. She fell into step beside him. "Did you get it?" he said. 9 minutes of photographs and a verbal confirmation. She held up the phone. "And the master index." She shifted the ledger against her chest. "This decodes everything else." "Lee," he said, "just the name." "What happened?" "He's contained." A pause that told her contained meant something specific and final, and she chose not to ask. "Ji-yeon." "Also out." "The 2 men at the perimeter." "I know," he said. "I know." They turned the corner onto the next block and she saw the vehicle. Nondescript, civilian plates, Oh Seon-hwa at the wheel, face forward. They were 4 steps from the car when the sound arrived. Not gunfire. Engines. Multiple, coordinated. The specific orchestration she'd learned to recognize as organized pursuit, coming from the tower direction. "Get in," Kang said. She got in. The car moved before she had the door fully closed. Oh Seon-hwa drove without speaking, taking a route that felt arbitrary but had the geometry of someone who had planned it. Kang was in the passenger seat, phone out, speaking in Korean too fast and low for Zaria to follow. She sat in the back with the ledger index on her knees and the phone with 9 minutes of photographs in her hand and looked out the rear window at the Minwoo Tower shrinking behind them, lit against the early Seoul sky, 40 stories of her own work, and thought about 11 people who had gotten too close to what was inside it. Then she looked at the phone. Not at her photographs. At the audio recording she had started in the chamber when she'd heard the footsteps outside the door. Before Min Jae had entered, before she had known for certain who was coming, the recording was 18 minutes long. It included the footsteps. Min Jae's call outside the door, everything he had said inside the chamber. Her own voice, steady, asking questions she had framed specifically for the audio because she had understood in those 2 seconds of silence before he opened the door that she was not getting out of that chamber with only photographs. She looked at the recording length, 18 minutes. "Kang," she said. He turned. She held up the phone so he could see the screen. He looked at the recording, looked at her. "How much?" he said. "Everything," she said. His voice, his confirmation, the fellowship manipulation, my discrepancy report, proof that the frame was constructed by Hanwoo Park with prosecutorial cooperation. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. "We need to get this to a broadcaster," she said. "Not a prosecutor, a broadcaster. Someone they can't suppress in the 12 hours it takes Shin Dae-woo's office to file a motion." "I know someone," Oh Seon-hwa said from the front. It was the first time she'd spoken since they'd gotten in the car. KSN Investigative. She's been trying to break the Hanwoo Park financial story for 2 years. I went to university with her. Zaria looked at Kang. He was already dialing. The car moved through Seoul's gray dawn, and Zaria held the phone and the ledger and felt the specific exhaustion that wasn't weakness, the kind that arrived after the body had given everything and found, at the bottom of everything, that there was still something left, some last reserve that wasn't energy, but was something older and more fundamental. Stubbornness. The refusal to have come this far for nothing. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen table in a kitchen it didn't belong in. She thought about a man offering her a handkerchief in the rain. She thought about 40 square meters of buried crime and 11 names that deserved to be spoken out loud. Outside, the city was waking up. And on the upper floors of the Minwoo Tower, she knew, Chairman Park Dae-won was somewhere in his gala preparations, surrounded by international partners and prosecutors and the carefully constructed machinery of a 40-year empire. Not yet knowing that the architect he had used and framed and tried to erase was now sitting in a car 4 blocks away with 18 minutes of audio and a master index that could bring all of it. The car stopped 3 blocks from KSN's broadcast center at 5:47 in the morning. Oh Seon-hwa had made 2 calls during the drive. The second one lasted 4 minutes and ended with her setting the phone down and saying, simply, "She'll meet us at the side entrance. She has a secure editing suite." Nobody asked who she'd spoken to first. Some information existed in the space between people who had worked together long enough to skip the preamble. Zaria got out of the car with the ledger index under her arm and the phone in her hand and stood on the pavement for 3 seconds in the gray pre-dawn light and breathed. Her shoulders ached from the ductwork. Her palms had been scraped raw on the cross-bracing struts, and she hadn't noticed until now, which told her something about what adrenaline cost when it finally stepped back. Kang came around the car and stood beside her. "You should let someone look at that cut," she said. He touched the dried blood above his eyebrow as though he'd forgotten it was there. "Later," he said. "That's what people say before it gets infected. I've had worse." "That's not the point I'm making." He looked at her. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth that was not quite amusement, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Later," he said again, and she let it go because the building in front of them mattered more than the argument, and she was too tired for arguments she wasn't going to win. The KSN contact was a woman named Yoon Ji-soo, 40-something, short hair, the specific alert stillness of a person who had been awake for 20 hours and was functioning on the particular fuel of a story she'd been trying to break for 2 years. She met them at the side entrance without greeting, looked at the ledger index, looked at Zaria's phone and said, "Show me," before anyone had introduced themselves. They went inside. The secure editing suite smelled like coffee and overheated electronics, and the faint ghost of cigarettes belonging to someone who'd quit recently enough that the smell lingered in their jacket. Yoon Ji-soo sat at the workstation. Zaria stood at her shoulder and walked her through the photographs in sequence. Not all 93 frames, but the critical architecture of them. Payment records cross-referenced to incident dates. The master ledger index that tied the numerical codes to names and events. The infrastructure collapse documentation. The political correspondence with the prosecutor's office spanning 11 years. Jisoo didn't speak during this. She moved between screens, in large specific frames, occasionally typed something in a separate window. Her face was the face of someone doing calculation rather than experiencing revelation. She had suspected most of this, Zaria understood. What she was doing now was confirming that the suspicion had bones. Then Zaria played the audio. 18 minutes of a chamber in sublevel 3. Min Jae's footsteps. His voice outside the door, the conversation inside it. Jisoo listened to all 18 minutes without moving. When it ended, she took her hands off the keyboard and put them flat on the desk and looked at the wall for approximately 10 seconds. "This is enough," she said. "To broadcast," Zaria said. "To broadcast and to prosecute and to end 40 years of a specific kind of untouchable." She turned to look at Zaria directly for the first time. "What do you need from me?" A federal prosecutor who isn't Shin Dae-woo or anyone in his network," Zaria said. "Someone who can issue a protective order before Hanwoo Park's legal team files a suppression motion. and I need it before the gala's opening ceremony at 11 a.m. Jisoo looked at her watch. It was 6:04 a.m. 5 hours, she said. 4.5 if they're efficient. Jisoo picked up her phone. What followed was the particular ugliness of justice in its administrative form. Not a single dramatic moment, but a sequence of calls, delays, misdirections, and the slow grinding of institutional machinery being pushed to move faster than it wanted to. Zaria sat in the editing suite and drank coffee she didn't taste and watched Jisoo work the phone with the methodical persistence of someone who had spent a career learning which doors had hinges and which were simply painted onto walls. Kang sat across the suite, phone in his own hand, coordinating something in Korean that she caught pieces of. Ji-yeon's name came up twice, a location she didn't recognize. At one point he said something that produced a long silence on the other end before a response, and she watched his face during the silence and read nothing in it, and that absence of readable expression was by now something she understood as its own kind of data. At 7:15, Park Soo-chul arrived. She had not expected him. He came in looking like a man who had also not slept, which was fair, and who was carrying a leather briefcase that he opened on the side table and began working from before he had fully sat down. He looked at Zaria once with an expression that had reorganized itself from the initial displeasure of their first meeting into something she would have described, cautiously, as professional regard. "Deputy Prosecutor General Choi Woo-jin," he said, without preamble. "He is not in Shin Dae-woo's network. He is not Hanwoo Park's network. He is," a brief pause, "someone who has been waiting for sufficient cause to act for approximately 3 years. He set a folder on the table. He will receive the evidence package at 8 a.m. and the protective order will be filed by 9. "The arrest flag on my passport," Zaria said, "will be suspended pending the counter-investigation. It will not be pleasant immediately. There will be legal process. There will be time. But you will not be arrested." She absorbed this. "How certain?" He met her eyes. "Certain enough that I am willing to put my name to it. Which, Ms. Bennett, is how certain I am ever willing to be about anything." She accepted that because it was, she had learned in the past 3 days, the accurate measure of the man. At 8 a.m., the evidence package, photographs, audio recording, master index, and a 40-page analytical brief that Park Soo-chul had somehow produced in the preceding 2 hours, was transmitted to Deputy Prosecutor Choi's secure office. At 8:23, Choi called back. Zaria was not in the room for that call. Kang took it in the corridor. She sat in the editing suite and looked at her own hands. Scraped palms, dried blood from the ductwork, a bruise forming on her left forearm from a cross brace she'd hit harder than she'd intended. The hands of someone who had built things and torn through things and was sitting still for the first time in 36 hours. She thought about the 11 names in the personnel files. She had not let herself think about them during the operation because thinking about the dead during an operation served no one. But she was sitting still now, and the names came anyway, not as abstractions, but as the specific weight of the personnel boxes she'd photographed. Names attached to dates. Dates attached to case closures that shouldn't have been closed. Families attached to payments that were the corporation's way of saying, "We have already decided what your grief is worth." She was still looking at her hands when Kang came back in. She read his face. "He's moving," she said. "Warrants for Chairman Park Dae-won, his son Park Jae-hyun, and 6 senior executives. Separate warrants for Shin Dae-woo and 3 members of his office." He paused at the doorway. "And a warrant for Min Jae-hyun." She nodded once. "Clean. No residual." "He'll be arrested before the gala," Kang said. "Good," she said. The word was small and flat and carried no satisfaction, and he understood that because he didn't offer any. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The editing suite hummed around them. Outside, Seoul was fully awake now, the sounds of it coming through the building's walls as a low, continuous texture. "Your men," she said. "The 2 at the perimeter." "Kim Jun-ho," he said, "and Ryu Sung-tae. They had both been with me for—" He stopped. "A long time." "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at her. The cut above his eyebrow had started to show through the dried blood again. The wound was still fresh enough to do that. "They made a choice," he said. Junho would be annoyed at me for apologizing for it. And Sungtae? A brief pause. Sungtae would have been annoyed that Junho got to go first. Something moved across his face. Brief, not quite grief. The compressed version of grief that belonged to people who had spent too long in circumstances where there was no adequate time for the full version. They were good men. That's the only thing that matters now. She held that. What happens to your organization, she said, after this? He looked at his hands. It becomes unnecessary, he said, which was always the goal. She studied him. You built something that was designed to dismantle itself. I built something designed to do work that institutions couldn't or wouldn't do, he said. The goal was never the organization. The goal was the outcome. He looked up. Same as architecture, I imagine. She considered that. Not entirely, she said. Buildings are supposed to last. The good ones, he said. Yes. It was the closest thing to a personal conversation they had managed in 3 days of proximity, and it arrived now, in the aftermath, the way important conversations often did. Not at the dramatic moment, but in the quiet after, when people were too tired to perform anything, and what came out was simply what was true. At 10:47 a.m., KSN broadcast. Yoon Ji-soo went on air from the studio above them, and Zaria sat in the editing suite with the broadcast feed on the monitor and watched the evidence she had photographed in a sub-level vault appear on national television for the first time. Ji-soo was precise and calm and thorough in the way of someone who had been holding this story at arm's length for 2 years and was now finally allowed to lay it down properly. The payment records, the incident correlations, the prosecutor's correspondence, the audio recording, played in full with a transcript across the bottom of the screen. Min Jae's voice, clear, confirmed. His own words about the fellowship selection, the discrepancy report, the frame. She watched his voice come out of the monitor speakers and fill the editing suite and thought about sitting next to him at construction walkthroughs, his hand on the small of her back, his voice explaining to skeptical contractors that the architect knew what she was talking about. She thought about the specific performance of that, the man defending her credibility while simultaneously reporting every professional instinct she had to the people who intended to use it against her. She thought about the fact that some part of her had known something was wrong and had chosen not to look at it directly, because looking at it directly meant dismantling something she had needed. She was done being angry at herself for that. It was human, and it was done, and what mattered now was what came after. By noon, the arrests had begun. Not all at once. These things never happened all at once, regardless of what the dramatic version of justice looked like. But the warrants were moving. Chairman Park Dae-won was taken from the gala venue's VYP preparation floor by Deputy Prosecutor Choi's team at 11:34 a.m., reportedly in the middle of a briefing with international investors who would spend the following weeks issuing careful statements about their commitment to ethical partnership standards. His son Park Jae-hyun was arrested at the Hanwoo Park Group headquarters. Shin Dae-woo was taken from his office at the Ministry of Justice building, which Zaria found, when Jisoo reported it from upstairs, to be the most satisfying detail of the day. Not the arrest itself, but the location, the specific institutional space where the corruption had been headquartered for 11 years. Min Jae was arrested at the Minwoo Tower. She didn't learn the circumstances until later. He had apparently returned to the building after losing her in the sublevel, had been in a conference room on the 14th floor with Daesun security personnel when Choi's team arrived. He had not resisted. The detail that reached her through Jisoo was that he had been on his phone when they came in and had simply ended the call, put the phone in his pocket, and stood. She didn't know who he'd been calling. She decided she didn't need to know. The day stretched out in the particular exhausted non-shape of aftermath. Zaria gave a formal statement to Deputy Prosecutor Choi's office at 2 in the afternoon, in a room that smelled like municipal carpeting and coffee from a machine that had been overworked, with Park Soo-chul sitting to her left and a recorder on the table between her and 2 prosecutors who were not Shin Dae-woo and whose questions were focused and professional. She answered everything. She answered in Korean where she could, and English where precision mattered, and she did not qualify or soften anything because the time for managing how things sounded was over. She was in the middle of describing the audio recording when one of the prosecutors asked about the pressurization shaft. "The emergency egress system," she said. "I designed it into the building. It's in the fire code submission on file with the Seoul Municipal Authority." "You used a system you designed to access the building's secured sublevel," the prosecutor said. "Yes," she said. "The building's secured sublevel, which contains documents material to a criminal investigation, which you then photographed without a warrant." She looked at him, then at Park Soo-chul. "The evidence was obtained while I was in a building I designed, accessing infrastructure I specified, retrieving documentation that had been fraudulently incorporated into my architectural work as part of a criminal conspiracy to frame me for crimes I did not commit." She held the prosecutor's gaze. "I'd suggest that the question of warrant is less relevant than the question of whose interests it serves to have that documentation remain unexamined." Park Soo-chul, she noted, did not attempt to redirect her. The prosecutor moved on. She left the prosecutor's office at 4:30 in the afternoon and stood on the pavement outside in the autumn light and felt the specific disorientation of a person who had been moving towards something at considerable velocity and had suddenly arrived somewhere and didn't know what to do with the stillness. Kang was waiting by the vehicle. He had addressed the cut at some point during the day. There was a clean bandage above his left eyebrow, precise and white against his skin. He was wearing a jacket she hadn't seen before, which told her someone had brought him a change of clothes during the hours they'd been in separate rooms, and there was something about the normalcy of that detail, the simple human logistics of a clean jacket, that made the day feel real in a way that the arrests and the broadcast and the legal proceedings had not fully managed. "The Fellowship Oversight Committee is meeting next week," he said when she reached him. "The suspension on your visa will be formally lifted before then." "Park Soo-chul told me," she said. "And the Minwoo Tower project documentation will be restored to your authorship in the official record." "Also told." He looked at her. "There will be more legal process," he said. "Months of it, possibly longer. You'll need to be available for testimony." "I know." "Which means staying in Seoul." She looked at the street, the afternoon traffic, the particular way Seoul looked in autumn light, which was different from spring and different from the winter she'd arrived in, and different again from the summer she'd spent in the building revising structural specifications at 2 in the morning. She had spent 18 months learning to read this city, and it had spent 18 months being the location of the worst and strangest thing that had ever happened to her. "I know," she said again. They stood on the pavement. The city moved around them in its ordinary way. People passing, traffic, a food cart 2 doors down producing a smell that her body identified as hungry, even though eating felt like a distant concept. "There's something I need to tell you," Kang said. She looked at him. "The Galeondong land seizures," he said. "The documentation in the vault includes the original property records, the falsified debt notices, everything that was used to take those properties." He looked at the street, then back at her. "The families who were displaced, there are 43 of them that my organization has been tracking. They have legal grounds now, real grounds, with documentation." She thought about a kitchen table in a kitchen it didn't belong in. "Your grandmother," she said. "She died 3 years ago," he said. "She never—" He stopped, recalibrated. "She never got to see it matter." Zaria looked at him for a long moment. "It matters now," she said. He didn't respond immediately. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before. Not the measured control, not the strategic calm, but something unguarded in the way of things that arrive in the spaces after the long work is done. "Yes," he said, "it does." The weeks that followed were nothing like the movies make Aftermath look. No clean resolution, no single day when everything was finished. There were depositions and counterfilings, and the particular procedural endurance of a case this size moving through a legal system that was simultaneously trying to prosecute it and reckon with its own role in enabling it. Shin Dae-woo's office had to be functionally rebuilt from the outside in. 4 additional prosecutors were implicated through the correspondence files. A special independent counsel was appointed. Zaria went to Chicago once, for 11 days, in the 3rd week of November. She slept in her childhood bedroom, and her mother made food that she ate all of without registering what it was, and her grandmother's framed letter was still on the wall in the hallway. And she stood in front of it for a long time one morning with her coffee and thought about the 9-year-old who had redesigned the porch steps in pencil on a notepad. And what that girl had understood, even then, about the relationship between structures and the people who lived inside them. She came back to Seoul. The Minwoo Tower opened in February, 6 months behind its original schedule, after an independent structural review confirmed that the building itself was sound, that the criminal infrastructure hidden within it had not compromised the architecture that housed it. Zaria attended the opening ceremony in a professional capacity because she had been asked by the independent oversight committee that had assumed management of the project, and because she had decided that allowing other people to determine her relationship to her own work was something she was finished doing. She stood in the lobby she had designed and looked at the ceiling she had specified and felt the building around her, the way you feel any structure you've put your body into. Not pride exactly, but something that lived below pride, in the place where the work was simply the work, and it held because you had known how to make it hold. She did not go to sublevel 3. The vault had been sealed pending the completion of the evidence processing. It would be years before the documentation was fully cataloged and the cases derived from it were resolved. 11 deaths, 43 displaced families, decades of institutional corruption. The full accounting would outlast the criminal proceedings, would live in some form in the record of the city's history. It would not be neat. None of it would be neat. She had stopped expecting neat. The Independent Development Foundation was established in March. Zaria was appointed as its youngest international chief architect at a board meeting that she attended in a room very different from the Grand Seorax ballroom. Smaller, fluorescent lighting, coffee in paper cups. People who introduced themselves by their work rather than their connections. The foundation's mandate was urban renewal with genuine community input, the kind of development that didn't erase the people it claimed to improve life for. Her first project was in Galhyeondong. She spent a month walking the neighborhood before she drew a single line, talking to residents, sitting in the small restaurants and the corner stores and the park that had been there since before the corporation had tried to take everything around it. She was not designing for them. She was designing with them, which was slower and more complicated, and the only way she knew how to do it anymore. At some point during the site walk, she found herself standing on a street where the houses stopped and a cleared lot began, looking at the specific quality of a Seoul afternoon in early spring, and she thought about 43 families and a kitchen table and a woman who had died without seeing it matter. She thought about it mattering now. She took out her notebook and started drawing. Kang came to see the preliminary designs in April, in her new office in the foundation building. Her office, which still felt strange to say, an office with her name on the door in English and Korean, which she had quietly requested from the administrative assistant who had asked how she'd like the placard to read. He came in the way he did everything, without announcement, which she had stopped finding surprising and started finding characteristic, the way you stopped noticing a structural element that had always been there. He looked at the designs on the wall for a long time. "You're keeping the park," he said. "The park was there before any of them," she said. "It stays." He moved along the walls slowly, taking in the community center, the revised residential blocks, the small commercial spaces at street level that she'd designed for the businesses that had been priced out over the past decade. He looked at each element the way he looked at everything, thoroughly, without performance. "There's a lot of natural light," he said. "Buildings should have natural light," she said. "It sounds obvious. You'd be surprised how many don't." He turned from the wall and looked at her. In the afternoon light coming through the office window, he looked, she thought, different from the man in the rain-soaked alley. Not softer. That word was wrong for him. More present, maybe, less armored. The distinction between a person in a defensive posture and a person standing in a room they were allowed to simply be in. "The Foundation Board is proposing a community memorial," he said, "for the people who lost property in the seizures. They've asked me to recommend a designer." She looked at him. "I'm not a memorial architect," she said. "No," he said, "but you're the right one." She looked at the designs on the wall, at the park she'd kept, at the spaces she'd left deliberate and open, places where the neighborhood could decide what to do with itself without an architect telling it the answer. I'll think about it, she said. That's not yes, he said. I'm aware of what it is, she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, your mother, when you were in Chicago, she asked if I was taking care of you. Zaria looked at him. My mother doesn't know you. She called the foundation number. She had done some research. A pause. I answered. Of course you did, Zaria said. What did you tell her? I told her that you were taking care of yourself, he said, and that I was... He paused for the right word with the same precision he applied to everything. Paying attention. She held his gaze. Paying attention, she said. It was the accurate description. Outside the office window, Seoul went on in its particular way. Building and tearing down and building again. The city that had tried to erase her and had failed. The city she had come back to because it was hers now. And the way places became yours through surviving them, rather than simply arriving in them. The Han River somewhere to the south. The hills to the north. The 40 stories of a building she had designed rising in the Yongsan district, its bones sound, its crimes dismantled. She walked to the wall of designs and stood next to them and looked at the space she'd left in the Galhyeon-dong plan, the lot where the houses stopped and something had not yet been decided. The deliberate openness of it, not a failure to plan but a refusal to answer a question that wasn't hers to answer alone. She reached up and moved one element 2 centimeters to the left, stood back, looked. The memorial can go here, she said. If the community wants it, I'll design something that doesn't tell them how to feel about what happened, just a structure, a place that holds space for it. She heard him move behind her, not toward her, just a shift of position, the adjustment of someone who was learning that coming close had a different vocabulary than everything else. That's yes, he said. That's yes, she said. She lowered her hand and looked at the design and thought about what it meant to build something that didn't claim more than it was. Didn't perform healing it hadn't earned, didn't demand gratitude for existing, just a structure. Light coming in at the right angle. Space that told the people who entered it that what they carried was allowed to be carried here. She thought about a white handkerchief in the rain, about a man who had offered her something small and precise in the middle of everything being taken away, and how that small, precise thing had been, in the way that the most important architectural elements were always the ones you almost didn't notice, the thing that held everything else. She didn't say any of that. She picked up her pencil and went back to work. Behind her, Kang Sung-hwan stood in the afternoon light and watched the architect who had walked into his life in a rain-soaked alley with nothing but a backup drive and a spine made of something harder than the 40-story building she'd designed, and he understood, as clearly as he had ever understood anything, that the woman in front of him had never needed saving. She had needed simply for the people in her way to be moved. He had helped with that. The rest had always been hers. Outside, Seoul went on. The city remembered now, not the woman who had been falsely accused, but the architect who had refused to be erased. Not the stranger in the rain, but the man who had finally laid down the weight of a 40-year fight and found, on the other side of it, something he hadn't known he was also building toward. The afternoon light moved across the office floor. The design stayed on the wall. And in Galhyeon-dong, on a cleared lot where a kitchen table had once stood in a kitchen it belonged in, the ground waited for what would be built on it next.